Hello, welcome to my YouTube channel. I am Samarth and I am back with another video for you guys. This video is going to be a little bit different because this video is not about Ionic or Angular. In this video we are going to try out something new, and the new thing that we are going to try out today is Flutter. Flutter is a UI framework by Google which is gaining a lot of popularity these days as it allows developers to develop apps for Android and iOS using a single code base. And to develop apps in Flutter, you'll be writing your code in a programming language called Dart. So if you have worked with any object-oriented programming language like C++, C# or Java, then you should not face any problems working with Dart because the basics are pretty much the same. There are a lot of similarities in the syntaxes as well, and moreover you don't need to be an expert in Dart to get started with Flutter. So in this coding challenge, I have decided that I'll try to create a simple calculator application using Flutter. So I have already set up the Flutter SDK on my machine, and now I am all set to create a new Flutter application and start coding. You can follow along if you want to. So the first thing I'll do is run the command flutter doctor, which will tell me if my Flutter SDK is set up correctly or not. So it might take a few moments to give me some results. And you can see that the doctor found two issues on my machine. And these two issues are not going to bother me because one of them is about iOS toolchain, and currently I am just trying to run this application on Android, and the second one is a generic issue which is because I do not have any devices connected to my system right now. So that's okay. Now I can just go ahead and create a new Flutter application. So I'll just go ahead and type in flutter create and then the name of the application. Keep in mind that you cannot have uppercase characters or special symbols in your application name. So if I use the name calculator-app, it is going to give me an error. So instead I'll replace hyphen with an underscore, and then it will accept and create a new application for me. So as you can see that the application creation process does not take very long. It just creates some files and then it attempts to get some Flutter packages. This is like npm install if you're coming from a JavaScript background. So let's just go ahead and wait for it to complete. And now that it has completed, let's open this project folder in Visual Studio Code and get coding. So now the project is opened in Visual Studio Code. I'll go to the lib folder and open the main.dart file, which is the only file that we'll be working on today. So as you can see, there is a lot of boilerplate code inside this file, and there are a lot of comments as well. So I will just go ahead and remove the comments first, and I'll reformat the file, and now the code is a lot smaller in size. So if you have a look from the top, there is a class called myApp which extends the Stateless Widget class, and it has a build function inside it which returns a material app. The material app has a few properties. There is a home property that we are concerned about, and the home property takes in an object of type myHomepage which takes in a title as a parameter. This myNewHomepage class is defined just below this class, and it extends a class called StatefulWidget. All Flutter applications are built with widgets. So everything you see in a Flutter application is a widget. There are two kinds of widget, stateless widgets and stateful widgets. As of now, just understand that stateless widgets are kind of static and cannot change their state over time, while stateful widgets can. Stateful widgets can change their state in response to a user's action or any event in your application. So just below the class myHomepage, which extends stateful widget, I have another class _myHomepageState which extends the state class, and this is where we'll be working for the rest of this video. So I'll just go ahead and remove everything from this class. And in the build function I'm returning a scaffold. We'll discuss what a scaffold is in a few moments, but for now let's just go ahead and remove everything from the body object. And I'll just delete everything from here. And now I need to pass in something to this body. So I'll just type in new container, and that's it. So now if I save and if I run this application, I should get to see my app. you need to install a Flutter extension for Visual Studio Code to get the same options that I have here, and then you can run your application from within Visual Studio Code as well. So in a few moments your application will be up and running. So now you can see that I have my app. It has the title Flutter Demo Homepage on the app bar. And this is because I have an app bar inside my scaffold. So scaffold is a widget that contains basic UI widgets like app bar, floating action buttons, body, menus, and a lot more stuff. Okay, so in the app bar you can see that I am receiving a parameter called widget.title, which I am passing from my app stateless widget. And if I go ahead and change this parameter, and I'll change it to calculator, and if I hit the refresh button on the debugger, you can see that the title changes. I can also play around with colors. So if I change the color to orange, the application color changes. Let's change it back to blue for now. And now I'll come to my container and start building the UI for our calculator app. So I'll start by creating a column because I want to have a column of widgets, and all these widgets will be aligned vertically. And the column will be a child of our container. The column can have more than one children, so it contains a property called children, which is an array of widgets. So first of all, I'll define a new text widget, and I'll pass in the text 0 as a parameter to it. Let's save and see what we get. So you can see that I get the text 0 in my app. Now let's put a comma and define another widget which will be displayed just below my text widget, because we are working in a column. So I'll just go ahead and create a button, and I'll just go ahead and choose material button for now. We'll change it if we don't like it. And inside my button, I'll define a child property. Mostly all widgets in Flutter have a child property. So I'll define its value as new text widget, and again I'll pass in some text here. So I'll just go ahead and pass in 1 as string here. So if you save and refresh your application, you can see that you get a button, although you cannot click on it. So you need to define a property called onPressed on all your buttons to make them work. OnPressed should be set equal to a function. So for now, I'll just assign a function that does nothing to onPressed property. And now you can see that I can tap on the button. Let's have a look at few more properties on material button. So you can define a color, and since we are working in an object-oriented environment, you have to select a color from the colors class. So you can type in colors, and then if you put a dot, you will get a lot of options to choose from. And I'll also set a text color, and I'll set it to white. So now if I refresh, you can see that the color of the button changed. Now since we want to have multiple buttons, we need to put this button inside another widget. And to do that in Flutter, you have a very handy option which lets you wrap this current widget inside another widget. So just click on this widget's name, and you get a bulb icon in Visual Studio Code and even in Android Studio. And if you click on it and select wrap with new widget, it will wrap your code in another widget. So I'll just name this widget as expanded, and what expanded does, it makes sure that its child takes up all the available space. So since we are working in a column, the button will now take up all the available vertical space. So now I'll wrap this expanded in a new row, and the row widget has no property called child. It has a property called children, which is an array of widgets just like the column widget. So I'll wrap everything inside an array. And now if I save and refresh, you can see that the button takes up all the available space horizontally. Now between my text widget and my row widget, I'll put in another widget, and it will be an expanded widget which will just contain a divider. So what this will do, this will take up all the available vertical space in our application and will make sure that the text widget is displayed to the top while the button, which is inside a row, is displayed towards the bottom of the page. So the expanded widget has taken up all the available space in the middle of the application page. Because we are in a row and it has a children property, we can replicate the expanded widget a number of times. So let's just copy this and paste it a number of times, and I'll refresh the application, and now you can see that I get 3 buttons, and the width of each of these buttons is reduced to 1/3 of the screen's width. This is because we have used an expanded widget. It takes up all the available space. So all the 3 expanded widgets are dividing the space amongst them. If I keep on adding new expanded widgets, the code will become lengthy and ugly pretty soon. So I'll just copy this expanded widget and I'll create a new function. Let's call this function build button. You can call it whatever you want. It will return a widget, and inside this function I'll paste in the code that I just copied and I'll return my new expanded widget. And now I'll go back to my row and I'll replace all this code with a call to my function. So instead of having all these lines of code, all I can do now is call build button function. So I can do this a number of times. So let's just go ahead and do this 3 more times. And now if I save and refresh the application, the code works just perfect, and now I have 4 buttons. So now all I have to do is use the build button function to have a button, and I can do it as many times as I want. Now since we have a row, let's wrap this row in a column widget so that we can have multiple rows of buttons. The column will again have a property called children, and I'll replicate my row a number of times inside this column's children property. So let me just go ahead and copy this a number of times and paste it so that we can have a number of rows here. So now if I save and refresh the application, you can see that I have a grid of buttons. And let me just go ahead and make sure that the buttons look a little bit better. So I'll change the button type to outline button, and I'll remove the colors and text color property. Now if I save and refresh, the buttons look a lot nicer. While we are at it, we can also set up some padding to our buttons and can also increase the font size of our buttons. So I'll just go ahead and add a padding, and the padding property takes in a widget called edge insets, and on the edge insets widget you can call the all function and pass in 24.0, which will apply a padding of 24 device independent pixels on all sides. So now you can see that the view is updated and our buttons are pretty big in size. So in the text widget, what I'll do first is retrieve a parameter called button text, and I'll just replace this static text with the value of button text. And now what I can do is just pass in a string from all my build button function calls. So I'll just do that. I'll pass in 7, 8, 9 and so on. So I'll do this with all my build button function calls. Let's refresh, and you can see that I now have a calculator like UI. While we are at it, let's change the size of the text on my buttons, and inside the text widget I can also specify a style which takes in a text style widget, and here you can specify properties like font size and font weight. Let's refresh, and I think it's too big, so I'll just go ahead and reduce the size to 20 instead of 24. Let's save and refresh again, and I think it's fine now. So now the buttons are okay. We have a lot of buttons that we have to work with. So now it's time to make the first child in our column, which is a text widget, look a little bit better. So this text widget will be used to display the results of our calculation, and as the user presses any buttons, this text widget will update accordingly. So it is just like a normal digital calculator. So the size of the text widget should be a little bit larger, and it should be right aligned. So the first thing I'll do is wrap this text widget with a container, and that's because a container can have padding. So I'll just go ahead and add the style property to my text, and I'll use the text style widget again, and I'll specify a font size of around 36 device independent pixels and a font weight of bold. Let's save this. Okay, looks good. Let's increase the font size further to 48, and I think it looks better. Now I'll add some padding, and I'll use the edge insets widget again, and this time I'll use the symmetric function, and this allows me to define padding vertically and horizontally. So on the vertical axis, which means that on top and bottom, I'll have a padding of 24 device independent pixels, while horizontally, which means on left and right, I'll have a padding of 12 device independent pixels. Let's save and refresh. Looks better. Now all I have to do is align this text to the right. So I'll use the alignment property on my container and I'll define alignment equal to alignment.centerRight. Let's refresh, and now the text is aligned to the right. Before concluding, let's just go ahead and create a variable called output in my state class, and I'll initialize its value equal to 0. And now instead of having the static text 0 in my text widget, I'll have output. So this will allow me to have updated values when I make calculations while implementing interactivity to our buttons. So I'll just have to update the value of the output variable and the value in our text widget will be updated. So our UI is pretty much ready now. We can keep playing with it as long as we do not get what we want. But since we are just trying out our very first Flutter application, I think this is good. So now it's time to get started with adding some interactivity to this calculator and its buttons. So we are back. So now it's time to add some interactivity and make this calculator work. So you can see that I have an onPressed event which takes in a function inside my button, and this is an onPressed which will be executed for every button on our calculator. So inside this function I can write the code that I want to be executed when the button is tabbed. So what I'll do is create a function called buttonPressed, and I'll pass in the value of button text to this function, and I'll just go ahead and create this function on the top in my class. So I'll just create the function buttonPressed. It will receive a parameter of string type, and the name of the parameter can be anything. Let's just keep it button text for now. The first thing I'll do is print the value of button text and see if it works. So I'll just refresh the application and let's just go ahead and try this out. And if I press the button, I get an error, and I think this is because we are using an arrow function on the button pressed and we are also using a set of curly braces. So let me just go ahead and remove curly braces from here, and then I think it should work. So now I have removed the curly braces. Let's refresh the application, and now if I press any of the buttons on my calculator, you can see the inputs logged to the console, which is the value of the button text. Perfect. So now we are getting the value of button text in our function, so we can use it to carry out operations based on its value. Before that, we'll declare a few more variables. We'll declare a variable called _output, which will be of the type string, and I'll assign its value to 0 as a string. This will be the variable that will hold the value of our output until we are ready to update the output in our view. And to update the output in our view, which means in our text widget, we will have to assign the value of _output to the actual output variable. So the _output variable is a kind of pseudo output variable. Other than that, I have a num1 variable which is of the type double and a num2 variable which is also of the type double. Since we are only caring about binary operations, num1 and num2 will store the two numbers, and the operand variable the value of the operand. So the operand can either be the plus symbol, the minus symbol, x, or the /. And based on the value of the operand, we will carry out a mathematical operation on num1 and num2. So let's go ahead and get started. The first thing I'll do is check if button text is equal to clear. And if button text is equal to clear, it means that the user has pressed the clear button. In that case, I'll have to do nothing. I'll just reset the values of all the variables. So I'll reset the value of pseudo output, I'll reset the value of num1 and num2, and also reset the value of operand. Then I'll use an else, and I'll check if the value of button text is equal to any of my operands. So if the value of button text is equal to a plus symbol, minus symbol, x, which is for multiplication, and a /, which is for division. So if the value of button text is equal to any of these symbols, it means that the user has entered a number and now they are trying to enter another number. So in that case, whatever is the value inside our output variable, we'll store that in num1 and will update the value of operand as well. Since num1 is of double type and our output variable is of string type, we will have to parse output as a double and then store it inside num1. So I'll use double.parse function and I'll pass output inside this function. Next, I'll just update the value of my operand equal to the button text. And lastly, I'll update the value of pseudo output to be equal to 0, which means that as soon as the user presses the button for any operand, the calculator's value will be reset to 0, which is perfect. Now we'll use else again and I'll check if the value of button text is equal to a dot, which actually means if the user is trying to add a decimal. So if the user is trying to add a decimal, we need to check if there is a decimal already in our input or not. So we'll use the contains function on our pseudo output, and if the pseudo output already contains a dot, in that case we will just print a message already contains a decimal and will return. In the else block, we will just append the decimal to our pseudo output. Perfect. Now we'll write another else, and this time we'll just check if the value of button text is equal to the equal symbol. So here we'll be doing all the calculations. The first thing we'll do is retrieve the value of output and save it inside num2. So we'll type in num2 equal double.parse and I'll pass in the value of output to this function. Then based on the value of operand, I'll perform calculations on num1 and num2. So if operand is equal to plus symbol, then I'll assign the value of pseudo output to be equal to num1 plus num2, and then I'll convert them to string. I'll do this for all the 4 operands. I'll just change the symbols and mathematical calculations here. And lastly, I'll reset the value of num1 and num2 to be equal to 0. And I'll also reset the value of pseudo output to be 0. And now just the numerical buttons are left, so we'll just type in an else here, and in that case we will just append the value of button text to our output. Finally, we are just going to print the value of pseudo output, and I'll use the setState function to update the value in our application. So I'll set the value of pseudo output equal to the value of output inside the setState function, which will make sure that the application state is updated accordingly. Now since pseudo output is a string, it can contain leading zeros. So to remove any leading zeros, I'll pass pseudo output as a double and then I'll convert it back to a string, and I'll restrict its precision to 2 decimal places. So I'll use the function toString as fixed and I'll pass in 2 as a parameter. Let's save our file and refresh the application. So I'll just try to add 2 and 5, and as soon as I press equal, the output is 0, and this is because I think I have made an error somewhere. Okay, so when the user presses equal button, then I have set pseudo output to be 0, while what I need to do is reset the value of operand. So I'll just go ahead and fix that. So I'll set the value of operand to be a blank string. Let's save the file and refresh the application. So I'll again try to add 2 and 5 and I get 7. I can keep on doing this and I'll get results. And if I press the clear button, it should clear the output. But the output is not being cleared, and this is because I must have made some mistake in the if block for the clear button. And this is because, okay, I do not have to redeclare all these variables, I just have to reinitialize them. So I'll just remove the types from each of these variables. And now if I save the application and refresh it, the clear button also works. So now our calculator is working. We can do a lot more, and we can keep working on this project to make it more sophisticated and implement more functionalities But since this is our very first application in Flutter, I think we have got pretty good results. And I'm happy working with Flutter. I'm glad that I pulled off this coding challenge pretty well. If you like this video, hit thumbs up. If you face any problems, let me know in the comments, and if you want more videos on Flutter, let me know in the comments as well. Thanks for watching.